Welcome, my brothers and sisters of the convocation, to the next Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker theory. Today's video will tackle a topic that was revealed in patch 5.55, so just in case you haven't finished your homework in the Akadaemia Anyder, hit the books and come back when you've completed your studies. Today's theory involves a character known as the Dreamer, Anima's role in Final Fantasy XIV, and the deep dark secrets of the Garlean royal family. We'll be tackling ancient mythology, spiritualism, the Grim Reaper, Final Fantasy X, and evidence within Final Fantasy XIV which provides some information that supports our theory. So strap in, get excited, and let's talk about Anima and its role in Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. Final Fantasy X was my favorite game of all time for almost my entire life until I finished Shadowbringers in patch 5.3. So when Anima was announced to be an Endwalker, I was naturally pretty excited to see my second favorite summon make its entrance. I was trying to figure out what Anima could possibly mean to the story, but couldn't quite put my finger on it. However, I've finally gained the evidence I needed to formulate the theory, and it wasn't until after 5.55 that the theory really started to carry weight. Keep in mind, I'm about to go more in depth than I ever have in any video before this one, so grab your popcorn and your notebooks and pay close attention. So to begin, in patch 5.55, there's a scene towards the end where Zenos and Fandaniel are discussing their plans and the failure at Cartano Flats. They discuss needing a massive amount of ether and the possible need to use Garlemald to acquire it. Fandaniel then makes a reference to a character he calls our Dreamer and states that the Dreamer will need to dream a little bit more deeply. Zenos then states,
"So be it. The Dreamer will not complain."
After this, Zenos makes a speech about drinking from a sea of souls, and then there's a loud roar that can be heard as the scene ends. But who exactly is the Dreamer and what is their purpose? I fully believe that the Dreamer is going to be Anima, and that it's also the source of that roar we heard. But to go even further, I believe the real identity of the Dreamer is none other than Zenos' cousin and leader of the 3rd Imperial Legion, Lord Nerva. If you don't know who that is, I won't be surprised at all, because there's almost no context except for subtle references to who Nerva actually is. So Nerva is not only the leader of the 3rd Imperial Legion, but he's also the son of Titus, Zenos' uncle. After the death of Varus, Garlemald is plunged into chaos and civil war, with Lord Nerva possibly becoming the Emperor at some point behind the scenes in the Shadowbringers patch quests. It's not clear whether Nerva actually became the Emperor, but there are signs that this is the case. In the 5.4 main story quest, Reviving the Legacy, Kryl discusses the current state of Garlemald and the Civil War. What's most important here is that she states, "Of greatest concern to us is the 3rd, a legion aligned with Lord Nerva. It appears they have received substantial financial backing from House Brutus." Alize then remarks that the Brutus family are the ones that took in Yatsuyu and Asahi, who we know is actually Fandaniel. So this took place in 5.4, but I want to take us back a little bit to the end of 5.3, where Fandaniel reveals himself to Zenos. In that scene, Fandaniel also reveals that he used the vast wealth of House Brutus to accelerate their plans. This lines up with Kryl's statement and lets us know that Nerva was financially backed by Fandaniel himself. There's also the order for Gabranth of the 4th Imperial Legion to return to Garlemald immediately. During the Castrum quest in Bosnia, it's stated that Gabranth was given these orders by Nerva, but to my knowledge, legions don't have a lot of dominion over other legions. So this makes me believe that Nerva was the acting emperor at the time of giving that order. It's also worth noting for later that Nerva, while the leader of the 3rd, is considered very weak and cowardly for a member of the royal family and a legatus. So, with all this in mind, it would stand to reason that when Zenos cut through to the throne of Garlemald, Nerva was likely there when he arrived. This much is evident from the scene where Zenos picks his new weapon, the Scythe. It appears that several 3rd Legion members died defending the palace, leaving several of their weapons behind. There's also dead bodies that litter the throne room when Fandaniel makes his grand reveal, tossing his coin into one of their helmets. However, Nerva's fate is unknown, but if my theory is correct, Zenos and Fandaniel have captured him and forced him to become the Dreamer through tempering. And from what we know of primals, a person can willingly accept a primal into their own physical being, much like Izal from Heavensward. I also think it's important to note one other thing, and that's the name of Nerva's father, Titus. If you're a fan of Final Fantasy X, this name will be familiar to you as the main protagonist's name is also Titus. Which leads me into Anima and why I believe that Nerva has been forced to become Anima the Dreamer. This would explain why he's missing, and with Titus being his father, the reference to Final Fantasy X would make sense. As a side note on Titus from Final Fantasy X, his alignment is that of the sun, with his name being based off of the Okinawan term for the sun. Both of his key items for his ultimate weapon, the crest and sigil, are also both aligned with the sun. Titus in Final Fantasy XIV is Emmett Selk's son, whose best friend was Azim, the convocation member aligned with the sun. It's entirely possible that Titus was named after Azim. To get started on the Anima part of this theory, if you compare the roar we hear at the end of 5.55 and the roar Anima lets out in Final Fantasy X, they line up perfectly with each other. Same tone, same everything. In fact, I'll play both of them on top of each other and then play them separately, and tell me in the comments section if you can hear the difference. Now I want to talk about the concept of anima itself and what the name is in reference to, because this is key to the entire theory. Anima is a feminine-based word in Latin that refers to soul or mind. In Jungian psychology, it is described as the feminine part of a man's personality and is typically associated with their mother, sister, or other important female figures. Where this applies to Nerva comes in the form of my favorite word to use in these videos, etymology. If we take a look at the etymology of Minerva, she is the Roman god equivalent of the Greek goddess Athena. Her name is considered to be a corruption of the Latin word mens, meaning the mind. So if we shorten this to Nerva, this would make a lot of sense for him to be named after the goddess associated with the mind. It's also worth noting that the metaphysical opposite of anima is animus, and is manifested in the brain or in one's sense of logic. Nerva is also the name of a former Roman emperor who took over for Emperor Nero, who is famously credited with burning Rome. Sounds kinda reminiscent of the Garlean Civil War, where Xenos watches from the rooftops as the country of Garlemald burns. Speaking of Roman emperors, Fandaniel has another funny connection to Nerva. The story of Julius Caesar is the tale of betrayal and the murder of the famous political figure, with his friend Marcus Brutus dealing the killing blow. If we look at Asahi, and in extension Fandaniel, his family's name is Asahi Sas Brutus. Julius Caesar was a member of the Populares, and the Populares are a faction in 14 that Fandaniel destroyed in an attempt to keep Asahi's death a secret. Since Asahi's parents likely were part of the Populares themselves, it makes sense that Nerva would take financial aid from them. It would appear that if they're using this connection, then Fandaniel betraying Nerva after using his wealth to back the 3rd Imperial Legion makes even more sense. Anima is also the base of the English word animate, which means alive or to give life to as it pertains to souls. Anima sola, which translates to lonely soul in Roman Catholicism, is typically depicted as a female soul in purgatory with chains restraining her wrist, which when broken means she has repented for her sins. This combination of mythologies and psychological analysis is likely what led to the creation of the Anima character in Final Fantasy X. Before we move on, stop smashing your keyboard with your Cheeto fingers to tell me I'm stupid, because I know I'm inevitably going to get a comment about how Nerva can't be Anima because Anima is female in Final Fantasy X. However, at the announcement showcase, Anima was referred to by Koji as it or he, so it appears the gender of Anima may have changed to suit their purposes for the story. So now let's discuss Anima as it pertains to Final Fantasy X, because this is also really important to the theory. In Final Fantasy X, certain people sacrifice their souls to become a tool of great power known as an Aeon. These Aeons are the physical embodiment of the sacrifice's soul. The faith, or statues that hold the soul of the sacrificed person, are said to be dreaming or dreamers, with their dreams creating these physical manifestations. Anima in Final Fantasy X was the Aeon created from the soul of Seymour Guado's mother, who sacrificed herself to allow Seymour to attempt to defeat Sin. This is where the concept of Anima Sola from earlier comes in. Her Aeon design features multiple pairs of arms, all restrained by chains, and a tusked creature-like visage, which appears to be tortured or in great pain. This is evidenced by its painful-sounding roar when summoned, and further confirmed by one of Anima's attacks being called Pain. The top half of Anima's design is representative of the female features of the soul of Seymour's mother, while the bottom half is more horrifying in nature, looking almost zombie or demon-like. It's also interesting to note that Anima's summon animation features a large hook that pulls her up from the underworld, but only pulls up the top half. Keep in mind, in many mythologies, souls are said to go to places known as the underworld, and are typically ruled by a deity of that mythology. An example would be Hades from Greek mythology, which is also semi-important to this theory, but we'll get into that later. When Anima is directed to use its ultimate attack, Oblivion, the enemy party is pulled through portals to the underworld, unleashing one of the most devastating attacks in the game. It's also interesting that the bottom half breaks free from its chains during this attack as well. The design of Anima in Final Fantasy XIV is extremely similar to the one in 10, but this time there are massive shackles restraining the wrist of its largest arms instead of just chains. This leads me to believe that Anima is being restrained in Garlemald under the control of Xenos and Fandaniel, and is the dreamer they're referring to. I believe this is also a reference to Final Fantasy X, with the dream of a faith being what summons Anima. Moving on, there's also a large amount of bluish-white fog coming from Anima's mouth in the artwork for Endwalker. In Hinduism, it's believed that the soul, or Anima, rises through the throat before leaving the body. This is commonly seen in a lot of films or pop culture media that depicts souls after death. If Anima's name is to be taken literally, it's possible that the primal is overflowing with ether by the time we encounter it, and the design is taking notes from the Hindu belief on souls departing the body. If you remember from Shadowbringers, this could be a more intense form of the ether sickness that we suffered from at the end of 5.0. In the original 1.0 version of the game, Anima was a resource used in the fast travel system. A person's Anima, or replenishable soul energy, was deemed an outdated mechanic for a Realm Reborn, and Gil was used instead. This is also explained by a Lalafell brass blade that sits right next to the Aetheryte. Shocker, a Lalafell that knows about souls. The Lalafell actually explains the entire process and why it now costs Gil instead of Anima, which honestly, I think it's kinda awesome that a random NPC in Ul'dah explains, with lore to support it, why a broken mechanic in 1.0 no longer exists. There's also the Anima weapons that were part of the Heavensward Relic weapon questline. Creating a soul-like element based on the Anima found within us, Geralt and Ardashir come up with a plan to use these souls in weaponry, giving us the Heavensward Relic weapons. These are used to house the souls created and allow the weapons to adapt to combat situations, with the base weapons being vessels that are upgradable. Soul Ether is comprised of souls of the dead that have returned to the ethereal sea within the planet. This is extremely similar to the concept of the life stream in Final Fantasy VII, which is an underworld or afterlife situation. It's also worth noting that crystals, a key component to many primal summonings, is comprised of ether remaining after one's death. Xenos plans to drink from a sea of souls, which is likely a reference to the ethereal sea. Xenos and Fandaniel are also collecting massive amounts of ether, using the towers for their master plan. Zodiark is located inside the moon, so it would appear that the plan is for Xenos to drink from a sea of souls, using Anima to summon him, then gorge himself on the darkened moon, which is him fusing with Zodiark. Kinda oddly psychotically poetic, actually. If this is the plan, where are they currently storing this massive amount of ether? If they're smart, they would be siphoning this ether back to Garlemald, where it's the safest to hold it. And it's possible that all the ether they collect is being placed into Anima directly and immediately. All we see in the artwork is Anima, its restraints, and a large amount of fog. So it's possible that Anima is being used as one giant ether storage unit, and they're waiting for the sufficient amount of ether they need to summon Zodiark to sacrifice it. And if the Dreamer is Lord Nerva, then what does Xenos care if someone weak and cowardly dies, even if it's his own flesh and blood? If it means getting closer to his goal of our fight, then even his own family means nothing to him. We also see in the new dungeon crawl video that it appears that certain large cables are seen, which are likely transfer tubes for large amounts of ether. It also makes sense because in the towers that dot the map, if the terminals are messed with, it automatically kills the Beast Tribe members that are being held in them. We see this when Arenvald and Fordola attempt to free them in Paglathan. This would send a large amount of ether to either the Ethereal Sea upon their death, or as a failsafe that also sends that massive amount of ether straight to Garlemald. But the question becomes, what could possibly be large enough to hold this massive amount of ether? If we take Anima as a literal definition, then it's safe to assume that Anima, the Primal, is a vessel for this massive amount of ether. Xenos has claimed that he's always dreamed of the final days of Amarat, but could never explain why or what the dream meant. Emmet Selk taught us that the Amratine sacrificed half their people to have enough ether to summon Zodiark, and planned to sacrifice the new life that sprung up on the planet to restore their people. Fandaniel would know this due to having memories of the final days, and would have explained this key detail to Xenos when explaining the images of his dreams. I think this has been their plan all along, and the reason why they needed to recreate the final days. The more death and destruction they cause, the more ether they have for the summoning, and the stronger Xenos becomes. It's also interesting to note that Xenos wields a scythe and is the new Reaper class that will be added in the Endwalker expansion. The Grim Reaper is an old tale that depicts a skeleton wearing a black robe and wields a scythe. The Reaper, or Grim Reaper, is a creature who represents death and whose sole job is to be a collector of souls. Does that sound like a certain spaghetti-haired, third-eye-having psycho that happens to be collecting souls? I also want to point out that the scythe is even more special because it appears to contain a large shard of white auracite. We know that white auracite is key to trapping and destroying Ascian souls and also collecting ether. Xenos is seen using this weapon to cut down Imperial troops and is glowing as he stands there in the aftermath. I believe Xenos is collecting souls just like the Grim Reaper. He's also the grandson of Emmet Selk, who is the Amratine Hades, Lord of the Underworld. This brings us back to the Underworld and the concept of souls in ancient mythology. I would also argue that the white auracite is a failsafe against Fandaniel should the Ascian try to betray Xenos. It's also interesting to note that Emmet Selk is the Scion of Light from Final Fantasy XII, with Zalera being the Scion of Darkness, or Esper. If we look at Zalera's glyph and then invert it, you can see what appears to be a resemblance to Anima. Emmet Selk also has something that might give us a clue, and it comes from his Garlean name, Solus Zosgalvis. Solus is an anagram for the word souls. This could be in reference to his role as Hades, Lord of the Underworld, but I think it's now coming into play here in Endwalker. Could Emmet Selk have found a way to gather the required amount of ether to summon Zodiark without the need to rejoin all of the shards? Is Anima the result of that experiment, and is it the ether storage unit that I theorized? Earlier in the video, we discussed Xenos telling Fandaniel about his dreams, but back in 5.2, there's actually a scene where this occurs. He describes the final days and can't explain why he's having the dreams, but that he's always had them. Fandaniel then remarks quietly, could Emmet Selk have found a way? And then claims that very few have memories of the final days and begins to explain them. Even though Elidibus and Emmet Selk are now out of the picture for the time being, their imprint on the story is still being felt. But what exactly was Emmet specifically looking to do that Fandaniel would know about? I think the answer is similar to what I said a little bit ago, in that Emmet found a way to resummon Zodiark without the need for rejoining the shards. As we know, the 13th shard was flooded with darkness and was considered a failed rejoining. This meant that 1/14 of Zodiark could not be returned to the source. It's unclear whether all 14 are required, or if they could make up the lost ether by just having enough to replace it. Or does it have anything to do with the constellation crystals we see in 5.3? We know these crystals can hold memories and be used to restore the seats of the convocation, but what would Xenos have to do with this? Did one of Emmet's experiments produce these dreams that Xenos has? We also have to remember that out of all the constellation crystals, Fandaniel is the only one whose stone was either incomplete or damaged. We also know that members of the Garlean royal family have been experimented on over the years, including Xenos himself. This allowed him the power to fuse with the primal Shinryu, and it stands to reason that Nerva was possibly experimented on in a similar way. If anything, I could see Xenos giving Nerva the resonant, then forcing Nerva to use it for the purpose of creating the primal Anima. The last piece of my puzzle is the throne that Xenos sits on in the Endwalker trailer. If you look closely, you can see what I thought initially was representing Vana. However, I believe this throne actually resembles the bottom half of Final Fantasy X's Anima. Here we can see two arms, what appears to be a crown above the head, and waves of hair coming from around the head. If you look at the throne from the back, we can also see that each side has a structure that comes up to a point, much like Anima's structures that surround it. So, for the simplest thing I pieced together in all of this, if you turn the glyph at Cartano flat sideways and lay it over Anima's glyph from Final Fantasy X, it's almost a perfect match for the shape. Overall, when you connect the dots, Nerva sounds like the perfect match to be the Dreamer, and Anima appears to be the form he will take. We've heard multiple times about Nerva, but have never seen him or know any real details about him. The lore team and scenario writers don't mention a character multiple times, tease us with information about them, and then not have them show up in a major way. In my honest opinion, Nerva will make an appearance in Endwalker, and obviously so will Anima. The question is, are they one and the same? But with any theory on this channel, I'll leave it up to you guys. Who is the Dreamer? And will they be Nerva or Anima, both, or neither? Hey guys, huge thanks for watching and making it to the end of this video, and don't forget to limit break that like button. Let me know in the comments section below your theories on who the Dreamer really is. Subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell to join the ranks of Soldier today. And for all the latest Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker news, rumors, theories, and trailers, I'm Soldier First Class, and I'm on to the next mission. Later, guys.